All right, welcome to 1.1 of Algebra 1. Today we're going to explore variables and expressions. We've kind of already talked about variables in the video that we did last time, but we're going to just expand on that a little bit more. And we're basically going to be working on how we can write verbal expressions for mathematical expressions and vice versa, that kind of a thing. So let's get right into it. I would encourage you to use the notes that I've provided. There should be a link to those on Google Classroom. But yeah, this will be notes 1.1, variables and expressions. And to start us off, you guys, I want you guys to think about an essential question for the chapter. And that is, how can mathematical ideas be represented? So think about that, and I'm going to ask for your response to that. But think of all the various ways that math ideas can be represented. All right, so I'm thinking that I'll be very interested actually in class to discuss this with you, of what you guys came up with. But obviously we can use words to describe mathematical ideas. We can use mathematical expressions. We can use charts, graphs, all sorts of, even pictures, right? So I'll be interested to see what you guys came up with for that. So I would encourage you guys to, as we're going along, explore your textbooks on page 5 and 6. There's a lot of terminology there. There's a lot of examples and stuff like that. And just to get used to your textbooks, just exploring page 5 and 6, we're going to kind of roll through it together here. So multiplication in algebra. If you paid attention to that movie or the video that I showed the other day, you would understand why we don't use x. It would be very weird if we were to do something that looks like this. Let me see if I can get my pen to work. If I wanted to say 5 times x, for instance, that just doesn't look right? So we don't use x just because x is a popular variable that we use within algebra. So to use it as a time sign as well could just be very confusing. So multiplication in algebra, we will either use parentheses or we'll just use it is the default operation. So if I wanted to say 5 times x, I could just say 5x, right? So anything that's written together like that, we default it to multiplication, unless it's two numbers, right? So if it's like 5 times 2, I either have to use the little dot. I often like to use the dot, or I can use parentheses, or we can use the time sign. All right, so that's between two numbers, but whenever we throw these variables in, we don't want to use x. Okay, so moving on to terms that we need to know. These are all found in your textbook, but they're also right here. I encourage you to get those in your notes. So variables are symbols used to represent unspecified numbers or values. And again, they're variable, so they can change, right? We talked about that. A term is a number, a variable, or a product or quotient of numbers and variables. It is very important that you understand what a term is in Algebra 1. Okay, so if I said something like 5 plus x, for instance, I might ask you, how many terms do you see here? Well, if a term is the product, which means multiplication, or quotient, which means division of two different things, or even more possibly than two things, then here, if I'm adding two different things, I have two different terms. This is a term, this is a term, okay? If it's separated by a plus or a minus sign, addition or subtraction sign, then it is going to be a separate term. So I could have something that looks like this, 5x plus 3abc, something like that, okay? Don't let this confuse you. I'm just making a point here about what a term is. Here, you should see that there are two terms still. This is a term because it's a product of 5 and x, and this is a term. It's a product of 3a, b, and c, separated by a plus sign. So terms are often separated by a plus and minus sign. If we have like terms, we can combine those and create fewer terms, but we'll get into more of that later. Factors are the numbers being multiplied in a problem. A product is the result of factors being multiplied. So if I multiply two things together, the result is the product. Okay, so product can be used interchangeably with multiplication. The product of two numbers is two numbers being multiplied. And then power slash exponent, an expression like x to the nth. The power or exponent in this case would be n. Okay, so this is the exponent, and the base is the x in this case. All right, so we call that a power or an exponent. Real quick, I want to jump into some like real world stuff with you guys here. So just related to variables and stuff like that. So Apple stock. So if I own 14 shares of Apple stock, which I do not right now, kind of wish that I did. Actually, it's not worth as much as it was a couple days ago because it just split. Not that you guys care anything about that. But I'm not sure how much each share is worth right now. How could I represent this in a mathematical expression? So if I don't know the value of my stock, but I know I have 14 shares, the 14 piece doesn't change, right? Unless the stock splits or something. The 14 is going to stay consistent. The price of the stock changes all day long. Okay, so since that number is changing, I might represent it with a variable. So I could call it x. I could call it a for Apple if I want. So I could say 14a. So 14 shares of Apple, where a, okay, A is the price of the stock. Okay, so if I want to know how much my stock is worth, I would take my 14 shares and I'd multiply it by whatever the price is at the time. Okay, represented by A. So if the price is $100, then I have $1,400. Right, 14 times 100 equals $1,400. I'm not sure what the price of Apple is right now, but you could look that up pretty easily. Okay, so multiplication algebra, I think I've already gone over this, why we don't do this, right? We don't use an x, but we do, like, it is the default operation. So you will often see things written like this. If you're like, what's going on between this 5 and the x? Just know that if there's nothing, if there's no symbol between it, it is multiplication. That is the default operation. Okay, a couple more things to throw in your notes, and I know this is kind of a lot, so that's okay. You can also get these notes straight out of your textbook if you want to. So an algebraic expression. An expression is made up of sums, differences, products, and quotients of numbers and variables. A variable is just a symbol used to represent an unknown. Power or exponent, okay, it's just, we've already talked about that one as well. It's a number raised to a power. And what the power means, you guys, if I have something like, because a lot of people misunderstand this, if I have something like 3 to the 3rd power, what this power means is it just means repeated multiplication. So it's just saying take the base and multiply it by itself however many times the power is, right? So if I have 3 to the 3rd power, it's the same as 3 times 3 times 3. Side note, and we'll do some more of those later. Some other things, terms. Terms, again, are separated by plus and minus signs in equations. They're made up of multiplication of two things or division of two things, variables and whole numbers. Factors, quantities being multiplied in an expression. Products, the answer to a factor type of problem. Okay, I think I've already gone over all those. So, you guys, today we need to have these key terms. Sounds like there's something going on. Pause the video for a second. Sorry guys for the siren in the background. So in your notebook, you might want to jot down some of these key terms. So if things are being added, there's a number of ways we can talk about that verbally. We can use the words more than, sum, plus, increased by, or added to. For subtraction, less than, subtracted from, difference, decreased by, minus. For multiplication, product of, multiplied by, times, or the word of even, right? So of is often linked to multiplication. We'll talk more about that later as well. Division, quotient of, or divided by. Okay, these key terms are going to come in handy because they're going to have you like change mathematical expressions into verbal expressions. So using these key terms here will be very helpful. I'm going to scroll through that one. So example 1. Here we go. So we're writing a verbal expression for the mathematical expression that's here. So here we see that we have multiplication happening we have a power happening, we have subtraction happening, right? So I got to include all that when I'm writing about it. So I might say something like this. I might say 16 times u to the second power, or some people might say u squared times u squared, right? That works as well, to the second power minus 3. All right. For 1b, you might, for this one, say half or 1/2, half of a plus, or you could say added to, or whatever you want to use from those list of terms that we had, plus, and what's happening in this one is division. So plus the, we could call it a quotient, plus the quotient of 6 times b and 7. Okay, so there's a number of ways you could write this, but half of a plus the quotient of 6 times b and 7. Okay, that's talking about the division that's happening here. So this is just one way of writing those. For example 2, they're going to give us a written problem, and we're going to have to turn that into now a mathematical algebraic expression. So for 2a, it says the product of p and 6. So I typically, a lot of students, when they first learn this, they're like, oh, multiplication, we don't have to put the multiplication sign, so we're just going to write p6. That is technically, I guess, okay. We just never write it that way in math. We always put the number first. So instead of this, I would encourage you to write, even though p came first here, I would encourage you to write the number first. So 6 times p. The product of p and 6 can be written just like this. And again, we want to avoid in algebra, avoid this, right? That is not what we're going to be doing. We're not going to be using x. The other way we could write it is we could write 6 times p and use parentheses around one of them, right? So that would be acceptable. But typically we just use this because it's the easiest. 2b says 1/3 of the area A. So area A is a variable, right? So we have 1/3 of. Of means multiply, right? That is a key word in multiplication. So we have 1/3 of, okay, so we don't need to worry about that sign. And then A, 1/3 of A, 1/3 times A. All right, so that's example 2. I think that's all the examples we have, guys. So I'm going to stop this video. I don't know if this homework is going to be accurate with your homework sheet that I gave you. Might not be, so don't worry about this too much. I have assigned a homework sheet for you where you are doing just these 2 examples, right? So you're turning some of these mathematical expressions, algebraic expressions into verbal, or turning a verbal into algebraic, all right? So really, one of the things that's going to help you a lot is to study these keywords here, all right, if you don't know them already. Kind of assuming that you guys know them, most of these. Anyway, we will catch up next time in class.